I was her maid by daylight, but at night, she used me like her toy. Let's uncover what really happened. The scent of beeswax and old lemon polish clung to the air in the grand house like a shroud, a perfume of meticulous neglect. My days were a rhythm of dust motes, dancing in the thin shafts of light that pierced the heavy velvet curtains, the whisper of my cloth over endless expanses of dark, gleaming wood, and the distant, melancholic chime of a grandfather clock that seemed to measure time in sighs rather than seconds. I was a ghost in this opulent mausoleum, a necessary but unseen cog in the silent, precise machinery of the household. Her household. I rarely saw her, the mistress of this shadowy domain. My duties were confined to the lower floors, to the endless polishing and dusting, to the silent, solitary preparation of my own meager meals in the cavernous, echoing kitchen. But her presence was a constant, a palpable weight in the atmosphere, like the pressure before a storm. I felt her in the subtle shifts of the ancient floorboards above, in the faint, almost imperceptible fragrance of expensive, exotic perfume that would sometimes drift down the grand staircase, a scent like crushed orchids and something darker, something wild and untamed. I knew her routine by the sounds that filtered through the thick stone walls, the faint, mournful cry of a violin in the late afternoon, the soft rustle of silk in the dead of night, the occasional, imperious summons for Mrs. Gable, the gaunt, silent housekeeper, who was my only other human contact in this vast, lonely place. Mrs. Gable, with her perpetually pursed lips and her eyes like chips of winter ice, offered no information, no solace, just a series of curt, unspoken instructions. It was a life of quiet, suffocating monotony, a life I had accepted out of a desperation born of dwindling finances and a shrinking list of options. But even in the anodyne routine of my days, there were moments, fleeting and unsettling, that pricked at the edges of my carefully constructed composure. Sometimes, when I was cleaning the grand foyer, buffing the already gleaming marble floor until it reflected my own pale, tired face like a distorted mirror, I would catch a glimpse of her descending the staircase. A tall, elegant silhouette swathed in dark, flowing fabrics, her movements fluid, almost serpentine. She never acknowledged me, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the confines of these stone walls, but I felt her eyes on me, a cool, appraising scrutiny that made my skin prickle, my heart perform a strange, unwilling little flutter. Her beauty was not of the conventional, reassuring kind. It was a stark, almost predatory beauty, all sharp angles and dramatic contrasts. Her hair, the color of a raven's wing, was usually swept up in an intricate, severe style that revealed the elegant line of her neck, the proud, almost arrogant set of her jaw. Her skin was pale, impossibly smooth, like polished alabaster, a stark contrast to her dark, intense eyes, eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets, to pierce through pretense and see into the very core of one's being. And her mouth. Her mouth was a slash of crimson in that pale, perfect face, a mouth that looked as if it could utter devastating pronouncements or deliver kisses that would shatter your soul. I tried not to think about her, not in that way. She was my employer, the distant, enigmatic mistress of this grand, decaying house. I was the maid, a creature of dusters and polish, of silence and invisibility. Our worlds were separate, distinct, destined never to intersect beyond the most perfunctory, impersonal of interactions. And yet, and yet, there was a pull, an undeniable, unsettling fascination that drew my thoughts, my attention, into her orbit. I found myself listening for the sound of her footsteps, for the faint strains of her violin, for the rustle of her silks. I catalogued the subtle shifts in her perfume, trying to decipher their meaning, to glean some insight into her moods, her desires. It was a dangerous game, this silent, one-sided obsession, a game I knew I should not be playing. But in the suffocating loneliness of that grand, silent house, she was the only mystery, the only spark of life, however remote, however forbidden. And I, a creature starved for connection, for sensation, for anything beyond the anodyne routine of my days, found myself increasingly, helplessly, drawn to her flame, even as a part of me, a sensible, terrified part, knew that if I got too close, I would inevitably, irrevocably, be burned. The Grand Library was my favorite room in the house, though my access to it was strictly for cleaning purposes. It was a vast, two-story chamber, its walls lined from floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes, their spines glinting dully in the dim, filtered light. The air here was thick with the scent of old paper, of aged leather, of beeswax, and that faint, ever-present undercurrent of her perfume, a silent testament to the hours she undoubtedly spent within its shadowy confines. I would linger here, my duster moving with a feigned slowness, my gaze drifting over the titles, a fascinating, eclectic collection that ranged from ancient philosophy to modern poetry, from arcane treatises on forgotten arts to slim volumes of decadent fin de siècle verse. It was a library that spoke of a mind that was both deeply intellectual and dangerously unconventional. Sometimes, I would find a book left open on one of the massive, carved mahogany reading tables, a delicate, embroidered bookmark, saving a place, a silent invitation, or so it felt to my overactive imagination, to delve into the secrets of her thoughts, her passions. I never dared, of course. The fear of Mrs. Gable's icy disapproval, or worse, of her mistress's displeasure, was a potent deterrent. But the temptation was always there, a low, insistent hum beneath the surface of my carefully maintained composure. One late afternoon, as the shadows began to lengthen, stretching like grasping fingers across the polished wooden floor, I was in the library, meticulously dusting the spines of a row of particularly ancient, forbidding-looking tomes, when I heard it, the soft, almost inaudible creak of a floorboard behind me. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat, my duster clutched in my hand like a weapon. I turned, slowly, my breath catching, and there she was. Standing in the arched doorway, her tall, elegant figure silhouetted against the fading light of the hallway, her dark eyes fixed on me with that unnerving, unreadable intensity. She was wearing a gown of deep sapphire velvet, a color that seemed to absorb the light, making her appear even more ethereal, more otherworldly. A single, heavy silver locket, intricately carved with a strange, serpentine design, rested in the hollow of her throat, its cool metal a stark contrast to the warm, pale skin it lay against. "You seem absorbed, child," she said, her voice a low, husky purr, the sound seeming to vibrate in the still, heavy air of the library. "Are you, perhaps, a reader?" I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Yes, madam," I managed, my voice a little breathless. When, when my duties permit." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her crimson lips. "And what kind of stories appeal to you, little maid?" Little maid. The diminutive, spoken in her rich, resonant contralto, was both dismissive and strangely, perversely intimate. It made my skin prickle, a flush of heat creeping up my neck. I I enjoy stories with depth, madam," I stammered, feeling foolishly inadequate under her unwavering gaze. "Stories that explore the complexities of the human heart." "Ah, the human heart," she murmured, her gaze dropping for a moment to the locket at her throat, then returning to mine, her eyes now holding a strange, almost melancholic, gleam. "A most treacherous and unpredictable organ, is it not?" She glided further into the room, her velvet gown whispering against the polished floor, her movements fluid, almost serpentine. She stopped a few feet away from me, so close I could smell the intoxicating blend of her perfume and the faint, musky scent of her skin. "This library," she continued, her voice dropping even lower, almost to a whisper, "is filled with such hearts, child. Hearts that have loved, and lost. Hearts that have betrayed and been betrayed. Hearts that have transgressed. Transgressed. The word, spoken with such quiet, deliberate intensity, hung in the air between us, an explosive charge, a forbidden promise. Her gaze held mine, and there was a challenge in it, an unspoken invitation to a dance I didn't understand, a dance I knew, deep down, I should not be joining. But the pull was too strong, the fascination too potent. I was a ship, caught in the irresistible current of her enigmatic orbit, and I was powerless to resist. "Tell me, little maid," she purred, her crimson lips curving into that slow, predatory smile, her violet eyes glowing with an inner fire. "Are you perhaps drawn to transgression?" The question, so direct, so audacious, so shockingly, beautifully, terrifyingly, intimate, stole the air from my lungs, leaving me breathless, trembling, on the precipice of an unknown, intoxicating abyss. Her question about transgression hung in the library like a shimmering, venomous spiderweb, its silken threads ensnaring my thoughts, my will, my very breath. I stood there, transfixed, my duster of forgotten, ridiculous implement in my trembling hand, my mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, fear, certainly, a cold, clenching dread that settled in the pit of my stomach, but also a strange, unwelcome, and undeniably compelling excitement, a frisson of illicit anticipation that coursed through my veins like a potent, dangerous drug. Transgression. The word itself seemed to pulse with a dark, seductive energy, an energy that resonated with some hidden, unacknowledged part of my own being, a part that yearned for something beyond the anodyne routine of my days, the suffocating confines of my carefully constructed propriety. I, I believe, madam, I began, my voice a hoarse, barely audible whisper, that there is a certain allure to that which is forbidden, a fascination with the boundaries, and with those who dare to cross them. It was a carefully worded, academic, sounding response, an attempt to maintain some semblance of composure, of detachment, but her violet eyes, those ancient, knowing, predatory orbs, saw through my pretense, saw into the very core of my being, where a different, far more personal, far more dangerous answer lay hidden. A slow, enigmatic smile curved her crimson lips, a smile that held no warmth, no reassurance, only a kind of ancient, predatory amusement. "Indeed, child," she purred, her voice a low, silken caress that nonetheless sent a shiver of apprehension down my spine. "The forbidden fruit always tastes the sweetest, does it not? Especially to those whose palates have grown weary of the bland, predictable fare of convention." She took a step closer, her movement fluid, almost serpentine, the sapphire velvet of her gown whispering softly in the still, heavy air. Her scent, that intoxicating blend of crushed orchids and something darker, wilder, seemed to intensify, enveloping me like a silken shroud, making my head swim, my senses reel. "This library," she continued, her voice dropping even lower, almost to a whisper, a seductive, dangerous sound that seemed to bypass my rational mind and speak directly to some older, more primal part of my being, "is a testament to such appetites, to the human heart's insatiable hunger for experience, for sensation, for that which lies beyond the pale." Her gaze flickered over me, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made my skin prickle, my cheeks burn. It was not a sexual gaze, not overtly, but it was undeniably, intensely, possessive. As if she were assessing a new acquisition, a rare and curious artifact to be added to her collection of transgressions. "You have a receptive spirit, Lena," she murmured, her voice a low, conspiratorial purr. She used my name again, and the intimacy of it, spoken in that low, husky timbre, in this shadowy, charged atmosphere, sent a fresh wave of shivers through me, a jolt of awareness that was both unwelcome and undeniably, perversely, thrilling. I sense it in you. A curiosity, a restlessness, a yearning for something more, more. That word again, the word that had hung so heavy, so pregnant with unspoken meaning in our first unsettling encounter. The word that had haunted my thoughts, my dreams, ever since. The world outside these walls, she went on, her voice a seductive, irresistible poison, is so limiting, is it not? So mundane, so devoid of true passion. She paused, her gaze unwavering, her violet eyes holding mine captive. But here, Lena, here, within these ancient stones, here, the possibilities are endless. Endless. The word, so vast, so liberating, yet in this context, in this room, spoken by this woman, it felt laden with an almost unbearable weight of forbidden promise. I felt as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice, the wind howling around me, the abyss yawning below. And she was there, on the other side, her hand outstretched, her violet eyes burning into mine, daring me to jump, daring me to surrender, daring me to transgress. Tell me, little maid, she purred, her crimson lips curving into that slow, predatory smile, her eyes glowing with an inner fire. What are your secret hungers? What are the boundaries you long to break? Her questions, so direct, so intimate, so shockingly, beautifully, terrifyingly, explicit, hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs, sending a jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity through my entire being. My mind, usually a bastion of rational thought, of sensible restraint, was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Fear, certainly, a cold, clenching dread that whispered of damnation, of ruin. But also, a wild, reckless, undeniable desire, a desire that was rapidly overwhelming every other consideration, a desire to cast off the shackles of my old life, my old self, and to plunge headlong into the intoxicating, anachronistic, and utterly forbidden world that she, this enigmatic, captivating, terrifying creature, seemed to embody, to offer. I opened my mouth to speak, to offer some stammering, inadequate response, but no words came. My throat was tight, my tongue thick, my entire being consumed by a strange, unfamiliar, and utterly overwhelming paralysis. And in that moment of helpless, silent surrender, she moved. Her hand, those cool, dry, surprisingly strong fingers, reached out and gently, almost reverently, traced the line of my jaw, her touch sending a shiver through me, a jolt of awareness that was both unwelcome and undeniably, perversely, thrilling. Her thumb stroked my cheekbone, a feather-light caress that made my breath catch, my entire being focused on that single electrifying point of contact. Do not be afraid, child, she whispered, her voice a low, silken caress, her lips almost touching my ear, her warm breath fanning across my skin. Fear is but a seasoning. It adds piquancy to the feast. And then, her other hand came up, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of my neck, her grip surprisingly firm, almost possessive, tilting my head back, exposing my throat, a gesture of complete and utter vulnerability, of profound, terrifying, exhilarating submission. Her crimson lips, cool and surprisingly soft, brushed against the sensitive skin just below my ear, sending an explosion of sensation through my entire body. Tonight, Lena, she murmured, her voice a husky promise, a dangerous, irresistible incantation. Tonight, we shall explore transgression. The world tilted, dissolved, reformed. The ancient, leather-bound volumes that lined the walls of the library seemed to recede, to blur. The only reality, the heat of her body, the intoxicating scent of her perfume, the silken whisper of her voice, the terrifying, exhilarating promise of her words. I was lost. Utterly, irrevocably, beautifully lost. And as her lips found mine, not in a kiss of tenderness, not in a kiss of affection, but in a kiss of possession, of hunger, of an ancient, insatiable, and utterly forbidden desire, I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that the feast was about to begin. And I, Lena, the quiet, unassuming maid, was to be the main course. The library, with its towering shelves of ancient knowledge and its oppressive, scholarly silence, transformed into a stage for a far more primal, far more elemental drama. Her kiss was not a gentle exploration, it was a claiming, a branding. Her lips, those crimson, predatory lips, moved against mine with a practiced, almost insolent confidence, her tongue a silken, knowing invader that mapped the sensitive contours of my mouth, tasting, exploring, possessing. A low groan rumbled in her chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated satisfaction, a sound that vibrated through me, igniting every nerve ending, shattering the last vestiges of my carefully constructed resistance. I melted into her, my body, with a will of its own, yielding to her silent, irresistible command. My duster clattered to the polished wooden floor, a forgotten symbol of my old life, my old self. My hands, which had been clenched into fists at my sides, now found their way to her waist, my fingers spreading out, exploring the cool, smooth velvet of her gown, the surprisingly firm, lean body beneath. Her scent enveloped me, that intoxicating blend of crushed orchids and something darker, wilder, now mingled with the fainter, muskier aroma of her skin, a fragrance that was both foreign and achingly, terrifyingly, familiar. It was a scent that seemed to seep into my very pores, to bypass my rational mind and speak directly to some older, more primal part of my being, a part that recognized her, that acknowledged her, that desired her. Her hands, those cool, dry, surprisingly strong hands, moved from my face, sliding down my neck, her fingers tracing the line of my collarbone, sending shivers of illicit pleasure coursing through me. They paused at the modest, high-necked collar of my drab, gray maid's uniform, and then, with a deft, almost contemptuous, flick of her wrist, she unfastened the top button, then the next, then the next, her touch a deliberate, tantalizing unveiling. The cool air of the library on my suddenly exposed skin was a shock, heightening my senses, making me even more acutely aware of the heat radiating from her body, of the searing intensity of her gaze, which was now fixed on the slow, deliberate revelation of my flesh. I felt a flush creep up my neck, a betraying tide of heat, but there was no shame in it, only a strange, perverse, and undeniably compelling excitement, a thrill of transgression that was as intoxicating as any drug. The last button gave way, and the rough, utilitarian fabric of my uniform parted, falling open, exposing the plain, cotton chemise I wore beneath. It was a stark, almost pathetic, contrast to the opulent sapphire velvet of her own gown, a visual testament to the vast, unbridgeable chasm that separated our stations, our lives. And yet, in this moment, in this shadowy, charged intimacy, those distinctions seemed to dissolve, to become irrelevant. We were just two women, caught in the intoxicating vortex of a forbidden, elemental desire. She leaned back, just slightly, her violet eyes raking over me, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made my skin prickle, my nipples harden into tight, aching buds beneath the thin cotton of my chemise. Simplicity, she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion that was both appreciative and possessive, has its own, particular, allure. And then, she lowered her head, her crimson lips, finding the sensitive skin just below my ear, her tongue tracing a searing path downwards, towards the hollow of my throat. I gasped, my head falling back, my fingers clenching in the rich velvet of her gown, my body alive with a desperate, urgent need. This was madness. Glorious, terrifying, exhilarating madness. A surrender to a desire so profound, so elemental, that it threatened to consume me completely. Her mouth moved lower, over the thin cotton of my chemise, her hot breath a tantalizing promise against my skin. I could feel the dampness of her lips, the gentle pressure of her teeth, as she nipped, lightly, playfully, at the fabric covering my breast. A small strangled cry escaped my lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated pleasure. She chuckled, a low, husky sound, a sound of triumph, of satisfaction, and then, with a surprising, almost brutal efficiency, she ripped the thin cotton of my chemise, the sound of tearing fabric, a shocking, electrifying punctuation mark in the otherwise oppressive silence of the library. The cool air on my bare breasts was a jolt, a shock, a sudden, intense vulnerability. But there was no fear in it, only a heightened, almost painful, sensitivity, an anticipation of her touch, of her mouth, that was almost unbearable. And then, it came. Her lips, those crimson, predatory lips, closing over my nipple, her tongue, her teeth, beginning a new, even more intimate exploration, an exploration that sent spirals of exquisite torment radiating outwards, down to the very core of my being. I cried out, her name a raw, broken sound on my lips, my body arching off the floor, my entire being consumed by a single, overwhelming, all-consuming sensation: pleasure. A pleasure so intense, so profound, so utterly, damnably, forbidden, that it shattered the last vestiges of my old self, of my old life, leaving me reborn, remade. In the crucible of her desire, I was no longer Lena, the quiet, unassuming maid. I was hers, her creature, her possession, her toy. And as she continued her ministrations, her hands, her mouth, her body, exploring, possessing, consuming, I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that the price of sanctuary, in this shadowy, anachronistic haven, was my very soul, and I was paying it, willingly, eagerly, beautifully. The grand, silent library, with its towering shelves of forgotten lore and its oppressive, scholarly atmosphere, became the unlikely stage for a primal, elemental ballet of desire and surrender. Maya, for I could no longer think of her by the formal, distant, madam, was a conductor, orchestrating my body's responses with a skill, a precision, that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Her mouth, her hands, they were instruments, playing upon me a symphony of sensation that I hadn't known my body was capable of producing. The rough, utilitarian fabric of my uniform lay in a discarded heap on the polished wooden floor, a forgotten relic of my former self. I was naked now, or nearly so, my skin exposed to the cool, dry air of the library, to the searing heat of her gaze, to the intoxicating caress of her touch. She knelt before me, her sapphire velvet gown pooling around her like a dark, mysterious sea, her raven hair, which had begun to escape its intricate, severe style, falling in soft, tantalizing tendrils around her face. Her violet eyes, those ancient, knowing, predatory orbs, were fixed on me, glowing with an inner fire that was both possessive and surprisingly, disarmingly, tender. "You are a canvas, Lena," she whispered, her voice a low, husky purr, her cool, dry fingers gently tracing the line of my hip bone, sending shivers of anticipation cascading through my entire being. A blank, beautiful canvas, waiting for the artist's touch. Artist. The word, spoken in her rich, resonant contralto, seemed to hang in the air, laden with a multiplicity of meanings, some of which I understood, some of which I could only guess at, some of which, perhaps, were beyond my comprehension. Her touch moved lower, her fingers brushing against the soft curls at the apex of my thighs, a feather-light caress that nonetheless sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity through my entire body. I gasped, my body arching instinctively, my hips lifting slightly from the cool, hard floor, a silent, desperate invitation. She smiled, that slow, enigmatic curve of her crimson lips, a smile that held no warmth, no reassurance, only a kind of ancient, predatory amusement and a dawning, dangerous, exhilarating complicity. Patience, child, she murmured, her voice a silken caress. The masterpiece cannot be rushed. And then her attention shifted, her gaze, her touch moving upwards, towards my breasts, which were still aching, tingling, from the earlier assault of her mouth. She cupped them in her hands, her cool, dry palms, a stark, delicious contrast to the heat of my skin. Her thumbs stroked my nipples, which hardened instantly, sending spirals of exquisite torment radiating outwards, down to the very core of my being. So responsive, she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion that was both appreciative and possessive. So alive. She lowered her head, her lips finding one taut, aching peak, her tongue, her teeth, beginning a new, even more intimate exploration. An exploration that sent waves of pure, unadulterated pleasure crashing through me, leaving me breathless, trembling, clinging to her for support as my knees threatened to buckle. I was lost in a maelstrom of sensation, my mind unable to process anything beyond the overwhelming reality of her touch, her taste, her scent. The world had narrowed to this single, incandescent point of contact, to the feel of her mouth on my breast, to the heat of her body pressed against mine, to the intoxicating scent of her arousal, a scent that was now inextricably mingled with my own. My hands, which had been clenched into fists at my sides, now found their way to her shoulders, my fingers digging into the rich velvet of her gown, seeking an anchor in the storm of my own escalating desire. I could feel the lean, strong muscles beneath the fabric, the subtle tremor that ran through her, a mirroring of my own barely controlled shaking. This was a new language, a new world, a new self, and Maya was my guide, my teacher, my priestess, initiating me into its mysteries, its rituals, its transgressions. And I, Lena, the quiet, unassuming maid, was a willing, eager, and utterly captivated acolyte. She moved then, her body shifting, her hands sliding down my back, her fingers tracing the curve of my spine, before moving lower, cupping my buttocks, pulling me tighter against her hips beginning to move in a slow, sinuous rhythm that mirrored my own. The friction of our bodies, skin against velvet, skin against skin, was an almost unbearable pleasure, a delicious torment that pushed me closer and closer to the edge. Open for me, Lena, she whispered against my skin, her voice a low, husky command, her warm breath fanning across my stomach, sending fresh waves of shivers through me. And I did. Without hesitation, without thought, my legs parted, a silent, complete surrender to her will, to her desire, to the intoxicating allure of the forbidden. Her hand, cool and surprisingly steady, slid between my thighs, her fingers finding the slick, swollen folds of my sex. Her touch was knowing, confident, her fingers moving with a skill, a precision, that belied any assumption of inexperience. She knew what I wanted, what I needed, perhaps even before I did. And she gave it to me, generously, unreservedly, her touch both tender and demanding, coaxing from me a response that was both a surrender and a fierce, untamed assertion of my own burgeoning desire. I cried out, her name a raw, broken sound on my lips, my body arching off the floor, my entire being consumed by a single, overwhelming, all-consuming sensation, pleasure. A pleasure so intense, so profound, so utterly, damnably, forbidden, that it shattered the last vestiges of my old self, of my old life, leaving me reborn, remade, in the crucible of her desire. The ancient, leather-bound volumes that lined the walls of the library seemed to recede, to blur, the only reality, the heat of her body, the intoxicating scent of her perfume, the silken whisper of her voice, the terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly irresistible reality of her touch. I was hers, completely, irrevocably, beautifully. And as the first, subtle tremors of release began to ripple through me, I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that this was only the beginning. The library, its air thick with the scent of aged paper and her intoxicating perfume, had become a crucible. My former self, the timid, rule-abiding Lena, was being consumed, reformed in the fires of a desire I hadn't known I possessed, a desire Maya had not only awakened, but seemed to command with an ancient, effortless authority. Her fingers, those cool, knowing instruments of my undoing, moved with an almost surgical precision, exploring the most intimate, most sensitive recesses of my being. Each touch was a revelation, a spark that ignited a chain reaction of sensation, sending jolts of pure, unadulterated pleasure through my already overloaded system. I was adrift on a sea of sensation, my body a vessel tossed by the tumultuous waves of her ministrations. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, my fingers clenching and unclenching in the rich velvet of her gown, my hips moving in an unconscious, instinctive rhythm, seeking a deeper, more profound connection with the source of my exquisite torment. The sounds that escaped my lips were no longer words, just raw, primal expressions of an ecstasy so intense it bordered on pain, soft moans, broken gasps, a keening, high-pitched cry that seemed to be torn from the very depths of my soul. And through it all, her violet eyes, those ancient, knowing, predatory orbs, never left mine. They were fixed on my face, watching, assessing, gauging my reactions, her own expression a complex mask of concentration, of satisfaction, of a dawning, possessive hunger that was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was as if she were feeding off my pleasure, drawing sustenance from my surrender, her own arousal fueled by the raw, uninhibited spectacle of my undoing. Her other hand, the one not engaged in its intimate exploration, came up to cup my face, her thumb gently stroking my cheekbone, a strangely tender counterpoint to the fierce, demanding intensity of her touch below. "Yes, Lena," she whispered, her voice a low, husky purr, her breath warm and sweet against my skin. "Give it to me. All of it. Give it to me." The words, a soft, silken command, were like a key unlocking the final floodgate within me. The tension that had been coiling in my core, tighter and tighter, with each passing moment, with each new exquisite sensation, finally, blessedly, snapped. A wave of pleasure, so intense, so overwhelming, that it shattered my senses, ripped through me, leaving me gasping, trembling, my body convulsing in a series of violent, shuddering aftershocks. I cried out, a raw, broken sound, my vision blurring, the ancient, leather-bound volumes that lined the walls of the library dissolving into a kaleidoscope of color and light. I clung to her, anchoring myself in the eye of the storm, tears of pure, unadulterated ecstasy streaming down my face, mingling with the fine sheen of perspiration that coated my skin. She held me close, her own body still trembling, her breath hot and ragged against my ear, whispering soft, soothing words, words of comfort, of shared release, words that were lost in the overwhelming tide of sensation and emotion. As the waves subsided, leaving me limp and sated, my body humming with a languid, delicious exhaustion, she shifted, her weight resting lightly beside me on the cool, hard floor. We lay there for a long moment, tangled in a heap of limbs and discarded clothing, the silence in the room now filled with a profound sense of peace, of completion, broken only by the soft sound of our breathing and the distant, melancholic chime of the grandfather clock. I turned my head, looking at her profile in the dim, filtered light. Her eyes were closed, her dark lashes fanned out against her cheeks, her crimson lips, slightly swollen from our kisses, curved in a soft, satisfied smile. She looked beautiful, content, and utterly, devastatingly desirable. She opened her eyes, as if sensing my gaze, and her amber, no, violet, they were always violet, how could I forget? Eyes, now soft and luminous, met mine. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw, her touch sending a fresh wave of warmth, of a tender, almost painful affection through me. That, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, was a promising beginning, my dear Lena. Beginning. The word, so full of implication, of future possibility, sent a fresh jolt of awareness through me, a jolt that was both thrilling and terrifying. This wasn't just a one-time transgression, a momentary lapse in judgment. This was something else, something more, something that would change everything. And now, child, she continued, her voice dropping even lower, almost to a whisper, a silken, seductive sound that seemed to wrap around me, drawing me closer, closer. Now, it is time for you to reciprocate. Reciprocate. The word, spoken with such quiet, deliberate intensity, hung in the air between us, an explosive charge, a forbidden promise. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird, beating its wings against the bars of its cage. I knew what she meant. I knew what she wanted. And a part of me, a dark, reckless, desperate part, a part that had been awakened, unleashed, by her touch, by her desire, wanted it too. Wanted it with an intensity that frightened me, that thrilled me, that consumed me. I rose to my knees. My movements slow, deliberate, my eyes never leaving hers. The cool air of the library on my bare skin was a shock, a reminder of my vulnerability, of my surrender. But there was no fear in it now, only a heightened, almost painful, sensitivity, an anticipation of what was to come that was almost unbearable. I reached for her, my hands, those clumsy, uninitiated hands, finding the hem of her sapphire velvet gown. The fabric was cool, smooth, impossibly luxurious beneath my fingertips. I hesitated for only a heartbeat, then, with a deep, shaky breath, I began to draw it upwards, slowly, reverently, unveiling the secrets of her body, preparing to pay the price of my sanctuary, to offer her my mouth, my body, my soul. The feast, it seemed, was far from over, and I, Lena, the quiet, unassuming maid, was no longer just the main course. I was about to become the devotee, the acolyte, the lover. The weight of her sapphire velvet gown was surprisingly substantial as I drew it upwards, the rich fabric whispering against her skin, a sound that seemed to amplify the charged silence of the ancient library. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with a potent cocktail of anticipation, reverence, and a dawning, exhilarating sense of power. This enigmatic, formidable woman, who held my fate, my sanctuary, in her delicate, ring-adorned hands, was now, in this moment, vulnerable to me, her body an offering, her desires a silent, eloquent plea. The gown pooled around her waist, revealing long, elegant legs, their skin pale and smooth in the dim, filtered light. My gaze traced their length, from the delicate curve of her ankle, up the slender calf, to the surprisingly firm, well-muscled thigh. She watched me, her violet eyes dark and dilated, her crimson lips slightly parted, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. There was no amusement in her expression now, no predatory gleam, only a raw, undisguised hunger, a vulnerability that mirrored my own, and that stripped away the last vestiges of my hesitation, my fear. I leaned forward, my lips finding the warm, soft skin of her inner thigh, just above the knee. Her skin tasted faintly of that exotic, intoxicating perfume, and something else, something muskier, more primal, the scent of her arousal. She gasped, a sharp, indrawn breath, her fingers clenching in my hair, not pulling me away, but urging me on, guiding me. My mouth moved higher, my tongue tracing a searing path along the silken landscape of her thigh, towards the dark, mysterious delta that lay hidden at its apex. The air was thick with our mingled scents, with the sound of our ragged breathing, with the almost unbearable tension of our shared anticipation. When my lips finally found her, she cried out. A low, guttural sound that seemed to be torn from the very depths of her soul, her body arching off the chaise lounge, her hips bucking against my mouth in a frantic, desperate rhythm. Her taste was intoxicating, a heady mix of salt and sweetness, a primal elemental flavor that was both foreign and achingly, terrifyingly, familiar. It was the taste of transgression, of surrender, of a desire so profound, so elemental, that it threatened to consume us both. I explored her with a reverence, a devotion, that surprised even myself. This was not just a physical act, not just the fulfillment of a sordid bargain. This was an act of worship, an offering to the goddess who had awakened a part of me I hadn't known existed, a part that was now alive, vibrant, insatiable. My tongue, my lips, my fingers, they all moved with an intuitive, instinctive knowledge, as if guided by some ancient, primal wisdom. I learned the rhythms of her pleasure, the subtle shifts in her breathing, the tiny, involuntary sounds that signaled her escalating arousal. And I took a fierce, possessive joy in her surrender, in the way her body writhed beneath me, in the raw, uninhibited cries that escaped her lips. She was a symphony of sensation, a wild, untamed force of nature, and I was the conductor, the orchestrator, the humble, devoted servant of her pleasure. Time ceased to exist. The ancient, leather-bound volumes that lined the walls of the library seemed to recede, to blur. The only reality, the heat of her body, the intoxicating scent of her arousal, the silken whisper of her voice as she gasped my name, a raw, broken sound that was both a plea and a benediction. And then, I felt it, the first, subtle tremor, the telltale clenching of her inner muscles, the sharp, indrawn breath that signaled her approaching release. I quickened my rhythm, my touch becoming more urgent, more demanding, pushing her closer, closer to the edge. Lena, oh God, Lena, please, she gasped, her voice a ragged, broken plea. With a final, guttural cry, a cry that seemed to encompass a universe of pleasure and pain, of surrender and release, she shattered, her body convulsing in a series of violent, shuddering aftershocks, her essence flooding my senses, a warm, salty tide of utter, complete, and devastatingly beautiful abandon. I held her close, my own body still trembling, my lips still pressed against her, tasting the aftermath of her release, a profound sense of triumph, of completion, of a shared, sacred intimacy, washing over me. We lay like that for a long time, tangled in a heap of limbs and discarded velvet, the silence in the room now filled with a profound sense of peace, of exhaustion, of a bond forged in the crucible of a shared, forbidden desire. The first, faint hints of dawn were beginning to seep through the tall, arched windows of the library, painting the room in shades of gray and lavender. The storm had passed, both outside and within. And in its wake, something new, something fragile, something terrifyingly, beautifully, real had been born. As I lay there, my head resting on her stomach, her fingers gently stroking my hair, a single, unwelcome, and utterly terrifying thought began to take root in my mind. This was not just about a room anymore. This was not just about sanctuary, about security, about a bizarre, unconventional arrangement. This was about her. This was about us. This was something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously, terrifyingly, exhilaratingly like love. And as that thought solidified, a new kind of fear, a fear far more profound, far more unsettling than any I had experienced before, began to uncoil in the pit of my stomach. The price of this sanctuary, I was beginning to realize, was far higher and far more permanent than I could ever have imagined.